The sprawling Blackwell estate loomed over the cliffs like a fortress, shrouded in a mist that seemed to rise from the ocean itself. Amara Donovan tightened her grip on the wheel as the gates creaked open, revealing the grand mansion that awaited her. She could feel her daughter, Lily, shifting nervously in the back seat. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. At 15, she was wise beyond her years, her big brown eyes reflecting a mix of skepticism and concern. "Yes," Amara replied firmly, pulling the car into the long driveway. The truth burned on her tongue, but she swallowed it down. This wasn't just about securing a job as a nanny for billionaire Vincent Blackwell's son. This was about justice. Justice for her brother, Alex, and the life stolen from her family. The mansion doors opened before she even knocked, as if the house itself had been expecting her. A tall man in a suit, cold and efficient, introduced himself as Marshall, Vincent's head of security. "Miss Donovan," Marshall said, his voice clipped, "Mr. Blackwell is waiting for you in the study. Your daughter can wait in the parlor." Lily shot her mother a concerned glance, but Amara nodded reassuringly. "It'll be fine. Stay close, okay?" The parlor was eerily quiet, its walls lined with portraits of Blackwell ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow Amara as she was led through the house. The study was no less imposing, with dark wood paneling and a roaring fire that did little to warm the atmosphere. Vincent Blackwell stood by the window, his back to her, his silhouette sharp against the stormy horizon. "Miss Donovan," he said without turning around. His voice was deep and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of authority. "Mr. Blackwell," Amara replied, keeping her tone professional, though her pulse quickened. She had to stay focused. The man in front of her wasn't just her new employer. He was the key to uncovering the truth about the corporate scandal that had destroyed her brother's life. Vincent turned, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. He was every bit as intimidating as the stories described, tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding an air of control that bordered on suffocating. "I've reviewed your credentials," he said, motioning for her to sit. "Your experience with children, particularly those with special needs, is impressive." "Thank you," Amara said, sitting down and clasping her hands to hide the trembling. "I'm confident I can provide the care Julian needs." His expression didn't soften. "I won't sugarcoat this. My son is not an easy child to care for. He's been through a lot." Amara nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I've worked with children in challenging situations before, Mr. Blackwell. I understand the importance of patience and trust." Vincent studied her for a long moment, his gaze unervingly penetrating. "Good. But understand this, I don't tolerate failure. If you're not up to the task, you'll be dismissed immediately." "I won't fail," Amara said, meeting his gaze with a determination that surprised even her. She wasn't here to fail. She was here to uncover the secrets buried in the Blackwell empire and finally get answers about the scandal that had led to Alex's death. The interview concluded abruptly. Vincent gestured for Marshall to escort her back to the parlor, where Lily was waiting. As they walked down the long hallway, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her eyes darted to the corners, where small, discreet cameras were mounted. "Security is tight here," Marshall said, noticing her glance. "Every room is monitored, except for the private quarters." Amara gave a polite nod, her mind racing. The cameras would complicate things, but she'd find a way around them. She had to. When they reached the parlor, Lily was sitting stiffly on an ornate couch, her hands folded in her lap. She stood as soon as she saw her mother, her relief evident. "Congratulations," Marshall said as he handed Amara a packet. "You're hired. Your quarters are in the East Wing. Someone will escort you and your daughter there." Amara thanked him, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. This was it, the first step in her plan. But as she and Lily followed the housekeeper down the endless halls, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that she was stepping into a trap as much as an opportunity. That night, after settling into their rooms, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the photo she had hidden in her suitcase. It was a picture of Alex, his arms slung around her shoulders, both of them laughing as if the world hadn't yet turned against them. "I'll find the truth, Alex," she whispered. "I promise." Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Lily stood in the doorway, her face drawn with worry. "Mom, are you sure about this place?" she asked. "It feels weird." Amara managed a reassuring smile. "It's just a big old house. We'll get used to it." But even as she said the words, a shiver ran down her spine. The mansion wasn't just big, it was suffocating, oppressive, and the man who owned it was just as enigmatic and dangerous. As the house settled into silence for the night, Amara lay awake, the weight of her mission pressing down on her. She had crossed the threshold into Vincent Blackwell's world, a place of wealth, power, and secrets. Now, she had to find a way to navigate it without losing herself, or Lily, in the process. But as the hours ticked by, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, hidden eyes were following her every move. And Vincent Blackwell was only the beginning. The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of seagulls cawing over the cliffs. The ocean waves roared below the estate, and the salty air wafted through her slightly open window. It was peaceful, too peaceful for a house shrouded in secrets. "Mom," Lily said, poking her head into the room. "Marshall said we're supposed to meet Julian at breakfast." Amara nodded, steeling herself. This wasn't just another assignment. Julian wasn't just another child. And Vincent Blackwell wasn't just another employer. Every interaction was a thread in the tapestry she was weaving to uncover the truth. The dining room was a cavernous space, its high ceilings and crystal chandeliers exuding wealth that seemed almost suffocating. Amara guided Lily toward the long table, where Julian sat at the far end, his small frame almost lost in the grandeur of the room. He was pale, with dark circles under his eyes and a guarded expression. His sandy blonde hair fell messily over his forehead, and his fingers clutched a crayon, scribbling furiously in a sketchbook. A plate of untouched scrambled eggs and toast sat in front of him. "Good morning, Julian," Amara said softly, careful not to startle him. He didn't look up. "Hi, Julian," Lily chimed in with her usual warmth. She had a knack for connecting with people that Amara envied. Julian paused, his crayon hovering over the page, before glancing up at Lily. "Are you the nanny's kid?" Lily grinned. "Yep, but you can call me Lily. What are you drawing?" Julian hesitated, his gaze flicking between Lily and Amara. Slowly, he turned the sketchbook toward them. The page was filled with dark, jagged lines, a chaotic depiction of a car engulfed in flames. At the center of the image, a shadowy figure loomed, its form undefined but menacing. Amara's breath caught in her throat. "That's very detailed," she managed, her voice steady. Julian tilted his head, studying her reaction. "It's my nightmare," he said matter-of-factly. "It's what I see when I close my eyes." Amara exchanged a glance with Lily, whose expression was a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Do you have this nightmare a lot?" Amara asked gently. "Only when it's quiet," Julian murmured, lowering his gaze back to the sketch. "But it's always the same. The fire, the car, and the shadow." The breakfast was interrupted by Vincent's arrival. He swept into the room with the kind of authority that silenced conversation and drew every eye to him. His suit was impeccable, and his expression was as controlled as ever, though there was a flicker of something softer when he looked at Julian. "Good morning, Julian," Vincent said, taking a seat near his son. "Have you eaten?" Julian shrugged. "I wasn't hungry." Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he turned his attention to Amara. "How are you finding the accommodations, Miss Donovan?" "They're lovely," Amara replied, her tone measured. "Thank you." He nodded, his piercing gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Good. I trust you'll make yourself useful here. Julian requires a strict routine, and I expect you to follow it without deviation." "Of course," Amara said, her outward demeanor calm even as her mind raced. She couldn't let Vincent see through her facade, not yet. After breakfast, Julian reluctantly allowed Amara to accompany him to the solarium for his morning lessons. The room was filled with sunlight and the scent of blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the tension that seemed to follow the boy. Amara watched as Julian worked through a math worksheet, his small hands gripping the pencil tightly. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if he were going through the motions rather than engaging with the material. "Do you like math?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Julian shook his head without looking up. "It's boring." "What do you like, then?" He paused, considering her question. "Drawing. And whales." "Whales?" Amara asked, genuinely intrigued. Julian's eyes lit up for the first time. "Humpback whales. They sing songs that change every year. Did you know that?" "I didn't," Amara admitted, smiling. "That's amazing." "It is," Julian said, his voice softening. "They're big, but they're gentle, not like sharks. Do you have a favorite whale?" He nodded. "The ones with scars. It means they've survived." Amara felt a pang in her chest. There was something in the way Julian spoke, an unspoken understanding of hardship that no child his age should have. Later, while Julian napped, Amara decided to explore the mansion. She told herself it was to familiarize herself with her new surroundings, but the truth was that her curiosity had been piqued. The photograph of Alex and Vincent, the nightmares Julian described, it all felt connected, though she couldn't yet see how. The locked room at the end of the east wing caught her attention. Its heavy wooden door was unlike the others, and a faint melody drifted from behind it, the sound hauntingly familiar. She reached for the doorknob, only to find it locked. "Miss Donovan," a voice said sharply, startling her. She turned to see Marshall standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "This area is off-limits." "I was just looking around," she said, forcing a smile. His gaze didn't waver. "The staff quarters and common areas are open to you. I suggest you stick to those." Amara nodded, retreating down the hall. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay behind that locked door was a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. That evening, as she tucked Julian into bed, he reached for her hand. "Miss Amara," he whispered, "do you think dreams can tell the future?" "Why do you ask?" she said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Because sometimes I think they're trying to warn me." A chill ran down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "Dreams can mean a lot of things, Julian. But no matter what, you're safe here." Julian didn't look convinced. "Promise?" "I promise," she said, squeezing his hand. But as she left his room and returned to her own, the weight of that promise pressed heavily on her. She had entered the Blackwell estate with a mission, but now, she wasn't just fighting for the truth. She was fighting to protect a boy who had already endured too much. Outside her window, the ocean crashed against the cliffs, its relentless rhythm a reminder that the secrets she sought were as deep and dangerous as the waters below. The days at the Blackwell estate began to fall into a tense rhythm. Amara's mornings were spent guiding Julian through his lessons and subtly gaining his trust. Afternoons were dedicated to observing the dynamics of the house, the locked doors, the guarded staff, and most of all, Vincent's carefully concealed emotions. But it was the nights that unsettled her most. When the mansion fell silent, and the glow of the security cameras became the only light, Amara found herself plagued by her own thoughts. Each room seemed to hold a secret, and every shadow felt like a clue. She had to remind herself why she was here, why she couldn't let her emotions interfere. One evening, Amara waited until the household had settled for the night before slipping into the small sitting room Vincent rarely used. The space was dimly lit, its shelves lined with books and old photographs. She scanned the titles for anything of interest but was drawn instead to a leather-bound photo album resting on a side table. Opening it carefully, she found a collection of family photos. Vincent stood beside a strikingly beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes, his late wife, Evelyn. Julian appeared in later photos, his face bright with the joy that seemed absent now. As Amara flipped through the pages, her fingers stilled on an image that made her breath catch. It was a group photo, taken at some formal event. Vincent stood on one side, flanked by several sharply dressed men, and there, smiling beside him, was her brother, Alex. The sight of Alex, alive, vibrant, and somehow connected to Vincent, sent a wave of confusion crashing over her. She traced the edges of the photograph, her mind racing with questions. Why had Alex never mentioned knowing Vincent? And what had happened between them to lead to the betrayal and heartbreak that had destroyed her family? The sound of footsteps in the hall snapped her out of her thoughts. She hastily returned the album to its place and slipped into the shadows just as the door opened. Vincent entered, his expression stern as he walked to the desk. He placed a folder on the surface and poured himself a drink, his movements deliberate. Amara watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding. Vincent opened the folder and pulled out a document, his jaw tightening as he read. She couldn't make out the details, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. "I won't let it happen again," Vincent muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. He reached for his phone and dialed a number. "It's me. We need to talk about the Graves situation." "No, not tomorrow, tonight. This can't wait." Amara's pulse quickened. Graves. The name was unfamiliar, but the urgency in Vincent's tone suggested it was significant. She waited until he left the room before emerging from her hiding place. The folder on the desk beckoned, but the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall reminded her that discovery would be disastrous. The next day, Amara's resolve was shaken further when Julian revealed another piece of the puzzle. They were working on an art project together, painting a picture of the ocean. Amara watched as he carefully added details: a red buoy, a small sailboat, and in the background, the faint outline of a car. "That's an interesting addition," Amara said, gesturing to the car. "Is it part of the story?" Julian frowned, his brush hovering over the canvas. "It's just something I remember. I don't know if it's real or not." "Tell me about it," Amara encouraged, her voice gentle. Julian hesitated before answering. "Sometimes, I see it in my head. A red car, going really fast. And then there's fire. I think," he trailed off, biting his lip, "I think it's connected to Mommy." Amara's stomach tightened. Vincent had mentioned Evelyn's death was a car accident, but the way Julian described it, so vivid and haunting, suggested there was more to the story. "Does your dad know about this?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "He doesn't like talking about Mommy. He says it's better to move on." Amara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes talking about things helps, even if they're hard. If you ever want to talk to me, I'm here. Okay?" Julian nodded, his expression uncertain but trusting. Amara's heart ached for him. The boy carried a burden far too heavy for his age. That night, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something important. She waited until the house was dark before making her way to the solarium, where she had noticed Vincent spending time after hours. She had no plan, only a need for answers. She found him there, standing by the large windows, staring out at the ocean. The room was filled with the scent of night-blooming flowers, but the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. "Mr. Blackwell," Amara said softly, stepping into the room. He turned, his expression hardening at her intrusion. "Miss Donovan, shouldn't you be resting? Your duties require energy." "I couldn't sleep," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I thought I'd take a walk." "And you ended up here?" he asked, one eyebrow arching. Amara hesitated before answering. "Your son talks about his nightmares, about a red car and fire. He thinks it's connected to his mother." Vincent's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. Julian doesn't understand what he's saying. "Maybe he doesn't," Amara said carefully, "but he's carrying those images with him, and they're affecting him." "That's none of your concern," Vincent said sharply. "Your job is to care for him, not to psychoanalyze him." Amara met his gaze, her frustration bubbling to the surface. It's hard to care for someone when half the truth is hidden. Julian needs more than routine and structure. He needs honesty. Vincent's expression flickered, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid. Amara sensed she had pushed as far as she could for now. "I'll do my best to help him," she said softly, "even if you won't." She left the solarium, her heart pounding. The confrontation had only deepened her suspicion that Vincent was hiding something, Not just from her, but from Julian as well. Whatever it was, she was determined to uncover it, even if it meant stepping further into the darkness of the Blackwell legacy. The following day, Amara woke with a renewed determination. Julian's revelations, coupled with her discovery of the photograph and Vincent's cryptic conversations, painted a picture riddled with gaps and shadows. She resolved to uncover the truth behind Evelyn's death and her brother Alex's connection to the Blackwell family. Julian had a restless day, which meant Amara was kept busy with breathing exercises and light art therapy to calm him. Lily, sensing the tension, did her best to distract him with stories of her school adventures. For a brief moment, Amara was struck by how natural Lily was with Julian, as if they were siblings rather than two children thrown together by circumstance. But even in those lighter moments, Amara couldn't stop thinking about the locked door in the East Wing and the haunting music she'd heard behind it. After Julian was settled in bed, Amara waited until the house was quiet. Lily was asleep in her own room, and Vincent had retreated to his study. Amara made her way through the dimly lit halls, her footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. Her destination was clear: the locked room that Marshall had warned her away from. The corridor felt colder than the rest of the house, the air heavier. When she reached the door, she pressed her ear against it, straining to hear. The faint melody drifted through again, soft, melancholic, and eerily familiar. She tried the doorknob, but it didn't budge. Amara glanced around, her heart racing. The hallway was empty, but she knew the cameras were always watching. She crouched to inspect the lock. It was a standard design, not impenetrable, but it would require tools she didn't have. Frustration bubbled inside her. She was so close, yet still on the outside of the secrets that consumed this house. The next morning, she decided to test the waters. Over breakfast, she addressed Vincent directly. "Mr. Blackwell, I noticed a room in the East Wing that seems different," she said, keeping her tone casual. "The music coming from it is beautiful. Does it have a story?" Vincent's hand froze midway to his coffee cup. His expression hardened, but he quickly masked it. "It's a private space," he said curtly, "off limits to everyone." Amara nodded, feigning indifference. "Of course. I was just curious. It's not often I hear music like that." "It belonged to Evelyn," Vincent said, his voice quieter now. "She enjoyed playing." The admission surprised her. It was the first time Vincent had mentioned Evelyn directly, and his tone carried a vulnerability she hadn't expected. But before she could press further, he shifted the conversation. "Julian's therapy schedule is changing next week," he said, his tone brisk. "I'll have Marshall provide the details." Amara bit back her frustration. Vincent was a master at deflecting, but she couldn't let his walls deter her. That evening, Amara turned her focus to the staff. The housekeeper, Mrs. Rowe, was an older woman with a kind face and a cautious demeanor. Amara caught her in the kitchen after dinner, carefully folding linens. "Mrs. Rowe," Amara began, "I was wondering if you could tell me more about Evelyn. Julian talks about her sometimes, but it's hard for him to remember much." Mrs. Rowe hesitated, her hands pausing mid-fold. "It's not my place to speak about Mrs. Blackwell," she said softly. "She was a lovely woman, kind, generous, but the past is best left alone. Sometimes the past helps us understand the present," Amara said, choosing her words carefully. "Julian's carrying a lot for someone his age. Anything you could share might help me support him." Mrs. Rowe glanced around, ensuring they were alone. The room in the East Wing was hers. She played the piano there every evening. It was her sanctuary. "Why is it locked now?" Amara asked, lowering her voice. "Because Mr. Blackwell can't bear to face it," Mrs. Rowe said. "After the accident, he shut it away, just like he shut away his grief." Amara's chest tightened. "What happened the night she died?" Mrs. Rowe hesitated again, then sighed. "It was supposed to be a simple trip into town. She wanted to pick up a surprise for Julian's birthday, but something went wrong with the car. The brakes failed." "Was anyone else involved?" Amara pressed. "No one knows for sure," Mrs. Rowe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there were whispers about sabotage, about someone wanting to hurt the Blackwells." Mr. Blackwell won't speak of it, but I've seen the weight he carries. The information lingered in Amara's mind long after Mrs. Rowe left. Sabotage. It was a word that struck too close to home. Her brother Alex had accused Vincent of ruining their family. But what if Alex had uncovered something deeper, something that connected him to Evelyn's death? Later that night, Amara found herself outside the locked room once more. This time, she came prepared. She had borrowed a small toolkit from the maintenance closet, and though she wasn't an expert, she had watched enough online tutorials to know the basics. Her hands trembled as she worked on the lock, the metallic clicks echoing in the silence. After what felt like an eternity, the mechanism gave way. She pushed the door open, holding her breath. The room was immaculate, as if frozen in time. A grand piano sat in the center, its glossy surface reflecting the moonlight streaming through the windows. Sheet music lay scattered across the top, as though Evelyn had just stepped away. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, faint but unmistakable. Amara's eyes were drawn to a small desk in the corner. She approached it cautiously, her fingers grazing the surface. A framed photo caught her attention. Evelyn with Julian as a baby, both of them laughing. The sight tugged at her heart, but it was the journal beside the photo that truly captured her focus. She opened it, her breath hitching as she read the first entry. July 10th. Vincent doesn't know, but I'm starting to worry. Marcus has been pushing too hard. He's not the man we thought he was. I fear what he's capable of. The name Marcus leapt off the page like a burning ember. Amara flipped through the entries, her heart pounding. Evelyn's words painted a picture of growing unease, a woman caught between loyalty to her husband and fear of the man who worked for him. The final entry sent a chill down her spine. August 18th. I can't stay silent any longer. I have to tell Vincent the truth, even if it means risking everything. Marcus has gone too far, and I won't let him endanger Julian. The date was the day before Evelyn's death. Amara's grip on the journal tightened. This wasn't just a tragic accident. Evelyn had known something dangerous, and it had cost her life. A sudden noise in the hallway made Amara freeze. She quickly returned the journal to its place and slipped out of the room, her heart racing. As she closed the door behind her, she realized the weight of what she'd uncovered. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was far darker than she'd imagined. The journal entries haunted Amara for days. Evelyn's growing fear of Marcus Graves and her intention to confront Vincent hinted at secrets buried deep within the Blackwell empire. The timing of her death, so close to the date she planned to reveal everything, was too convenient to ignore. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that she was inching closer to a dangerous truth, one that could explain not only Evelyn's death but also Alex's downfall. And if Marcus was truly the thread tying everything together, it meant he was far more dangerous than she had imagined. One stormy evening, while Julian worked on a puzzle in the living room, Amara decided to confront Vincent. She had waited long enough, and her discovery of Evelyn's journal had given her the leverage she needed. She found him in the study, poring over documents with a furrowed brow. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice firm as she stepped into the room. Vincent looked up, his expression guarded. "Miss Donovan," he said, setting his pen down. "Is there something you need?" "I think it's time we had an honest conversation," she said, closing the door behind her. "About Evelyn, and about Marcus Graves." The mention of Marcus's name made Vincent's jaw tighten. "I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but this is not your business." "It became my business when I found Evelyn's journal," Amara countered, meeting his gaze head-on. "She was scared of Marcus. She planned to tell you everything, and then she died. That's not a coincidence." Vincent stood, his towering frame casting a shadow across the room. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then tell me," Amara challenged. "Help me understand. Because if Marcus is responsible for Evelyn's death, then you deserve to know the truth." The tension between them was palpable. For a moment, it seemed as if Vincent might lash out, but then his shoulders sagged. He turned away, staring out the window at the storm raging outside. "Evelyn was everything," he said, his voice low. "When she told me she was worried about Marcus, I didn't take her seriously. I thought she was overreacting, seeing threats where there were none." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. The night she died, I got a call. She said she needed to talk, that it couldn't wait. But I was in the middle of a meeting, and I told her we'd talk in the morning. By the time I got home, it was too late. Amara's heart ached at the raw pain in his voice, but she couldn't let herself feel sympathy. Not yet. Did you investigate? Did you find out if the brakes were tampered with? Vincent nodded. The mechanics found signs of tampering, but there wasn't enough evidence to tie it to anyone. Marcus disappeared shortly after her funeral, and I hoped it was over. But it's not over, Amara said. Marcus is still out there, and he's still a threat. Vincent turned to face her, his eyes blazing. What do you want from me, Miss Donovan? An admission of guilt? A confession that I failed my wife and son? Fine. I failed them. I didn't protect Evelyn, and I've spent every day since trying to make up for it. Amara hesitated, the intensity of his words cutting through her resolve. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to help you. But I need you to trust me. Vincent's gaze softened, but before he could respond, the door burst open. Marshall stood in the doorway, his face pale. Sir, we have a situation. Amara followed Vincent and Marshall to the security room, where the staff were huddled around the monitors. One of the cameras showed the front gate, where a black SUV idled ominously. It's him, Marshall said grimly. Marcus Graves. Amara's breath hitched. Marcus had returned, and he wasn't hiding anymore. Lock down the house, Vincent ordered, his voice calm but firm. I want every door secured and every camera monitored. What does he want? Amara asked, her voice shaking. Vincent glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Revenge. The storm outside grew fiercer, the wind howling as rain lashed against the windows. The house felt like a fortress under siege, its inhabitants tense and on edge. Amara stayed close to Julian, who was oblivious to the danger. She tried to keep him occupied with games and stories, but her mind was elsewhere. Hours passed with no movement from the SUV. The waiting was unbearable, the silence thick with anticipation. Amara couldn't help but feel like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. Then, just after midnight, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flashes of lightning outside. Amara's heart raced as she reached for Julian, pulling him close. The security team scrambled to activate the backup generator, but Vincent's voice cut through the chaos. Stay calm, he commanded. Marshall, secure the east wing. Amara, take Julian to the safe room. Amara nodded, clutching Julian's hand as she guided him through the darkened halls. The safe room was a small, reinforced space hidden behind a false wall in the library. She ushered Julian inside, her pulse pounding as she locked the door behind them. What's happening? Julian whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Just a precaution, Amara said, forcing a smile. We're safe here. But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. The safe room was meant to protect them from external threats, but what if the real danger was already inside the house? Hours passed in tense silence. Amara tried to distract Julian with stories, but her own fears made it hard to focus. Then, just as she thought the worst was over, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Her breath caught. Vincent, she called out, her voice trembling. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice replied, a voice that wasn't Vincent's. Amara. Her blood ran cold. It was Alex. Alex. Amara's voice cracked as she clutched Julian closer. Her mind raced. This couldn't be possible. Her brother was dead, or at least, that's what she had believed for years. Open the door. The voice demanded, firm but oddly familiar. I need to explain. Explain what? She hissed, keeping her voice low so as not to scare Julian further. How you let us think you were dead. How you destroyed our family. The silence on the other side was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the house's backup systems coming to life. Julian gripped her hand tightly, his fear palpable. I can't explain everything here, Alex said finally. But I swear, Amara, I'm not your enemy. Marcus is. And if you don't let me in, he'll use you to get to Vincent. Amara hesitated. The voice was Alex's, but the years of betrayal and pain clouded her judgment. She glanced down at Julian, who looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Could she risk it? "Miss Amara," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "What if he's telling the truth?" Amara's chest tightened. "Stay behind me," she said softly. She pressed the release button for the safe room door, and it slid open with a low hiss. Alex stepped inside, his face illuminated by the dim emergency lights. He looked older, his features hardened by time and hardship, but his eyes, the same piercing green as hers, were unmistakable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. "You have 2 minutes," Amara said coldly, her protective instincts flaring as she stood between Alex and Julian. "Start talking." Alex's explanation came in rushed whispers, his voice tinged with desperation. After Marcus orchestrated the downfall of their family, Alex had uncovered evidence linking him to far darker crimes, including Evelyn Blackwell's death. When Marcus discovered Alex's investigation, he threatened their family. Faking his death was the only way Alex believed he could protect them. "I've been working to expose him ever since," Alex said, his gaze pleading. "I've been in contact with Evelyn before her death. She knew too much. Marcus killed her to silence her. And now he's back to finish what he started." Amara's head swam with conflicting emotions. "You could have come to me," she said, her voice trembling. "You let me grieve for years, Alex. You let me think you were gone." "I had to," Alex said. "Marcus would have come after you, after Lily. I couldn't risk it." "You left me to pick up the pieces," she shot back, her anger breaking through. "You abandoned us." "I know," Alex said softly, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. But right now, you need to trust me. Marcus is already inside the house." Amara's blood ran cold at Alex's words. "Inside?" she repeated. "How do you know?" "Because I saw him disable the cameras in the West Wing," Alex said. "He's hunting Vincent, and if he gets what he's after, none of us will leave this place alive." Julian whimpered, clutching Amara's arm. "Miss Amara, is my dad okay?" She knelt down, forcing a calm expression onto her face despite the panic surging inside her. "Your dad is smart, Julian. He knows how to protect himself. But I need you to stay quiet and brave, okay?" Julian nodded, his small hands trembling. Amara turned back to Alex. "If Marcus is here, why are you?" "To stop him," Alex said simply, "and to keep you safe." Reluctantly, Amara decided they couldn't stay locked in the safe room. If Marcus was already in the house, they needed to find Vincent and warn him before it was too late. She led Julian and Alex through the darkened halls, her nerves on edge with every step. The mansion's grandeur had turned into a maze of shadows and uncertainty. When they reached the main staircase, a crash echoed from the West Wing, followed by muffled voices. Amara froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Alex motioned for her to stay back as he crept forward to investigate. Moments later, he returned, his expression grim. "It's Marcus," he whispered. "He's not alone." The revelation sent a chill down Amara's spine. "How many?" she asked. "2 others," Alex said. "Hired muscle. Probably. They're searching for Vincent." Amara clenched her fists, anger and fear warring within her. "We need to stop them." Alex shook his head. "We need to get Julian somewhere safe first." But Julian tugged at Amara's sleeve, his eyes wide. "Miss Amara, they'll hurt my dad. We can't leave him." The boy's words pierced through Amara's resolve. She looked at Alex. "Do you have a plan?" Alex hesitated, then nodded. "We split up. I'll draw their attention. You take Julian to Vincent's study. It's the most secure room in the house. Marshall should already be there." "And if they find you?" Amara asked. "I'll handle it," Alex said firmly. "I've been dealing with Marcus for years. I know how he works." Amara's instincts screamed at her to keep Julian close, but she knew Alex was right. They didn't have time to argue. "Fine," she said, "but if you get yourself killed for real this time, I'll never forgive you." A faint smile tugged at Alex's lips. "Noted." Amara guided Julian toward the study, her every sense on high alert. The mansion, once imposing but familiar, now felt like enemy territory. She kept a tight grip on Julian's hand, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. When they reached the study, the door was ajar. Amara's stomach twisted with dread as she pushed it open, half expecting to find Marcus waiting inside. Instead, she found Vincent standing at the desk, a gun in his hand and a steely determination in his eyes. "Amara," he said, his gaze flicking to Julian. "What are you doing here?" "Marcus is in the house," she said quickly. "Alex is trying to lead him away." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Alex? Your brother? He's alive?" "Yes. And he's trying to stop Marcus," Amara said. "But we need to be ready." Vincent's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Marshall is securing the perimeter. Stay here with Julian. If Marcus comes, I'll handle him." "Like hell you will," Amara snapped. "I didn't come this far just to stand on the sidelines." Vincent stared at her, surprised by her defiance. Then, to her astonishment, he smiled, a faint, fleeting expression that softened the harsh lines of his face. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Donovan." "Maybe both," she said. "But we're in this together." The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a warning. Amara stood beside Vincent, her pulse pounding as they waited for the inevitable. Julian clung to her side, his small frame trembling but his eyes resolute. Somewhere in the darkness, Marcus was closing in, and when he arrived, there would be no turning back. The study fell silent except for the distant rumble of thunder and the erratic thud of Amara's heartbeat. Vincent stood with his gun raised, his eyes sharp as he scanned the room. Julian clung to Amara's side, his small hands trembling. "Stay close," Vincent commanded, his voice low but firm. "And whatever happens, don't let Julian out of your sight." Amara nodded, gripping Julian's hand tightly. Her mind raced as she tried to process everything. Alex was alive, Marcus was in the house, and they were now facing a threat far more dangerous than she had anticipated. The sudden crackle of static made them all jump. Vincent's radio buzzed, and Marshall's voice came through, strained and tense. "Sir," West Wing breached. "We have 3 intruders confirmed, armed. They're headed your way." Vincent pressed the radio to his mouth. "Hold them off as long as you can. Lock down all exits." "Understood," Marshall replied. The line went dead. Vincent turned to Amara. "You need to take Julian and hide." "No," Amara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm not leaving you alone to face them." "This isn't your fight," Vincent said sharply. "Your priority is Julian." "My priority is protecting him," Amara shot back. "And if Marcus gets past you, there's no safe place in this house." Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he moved to his desk and retrieved a key from a hidden compartment. He crossed to a bookshelf and slid it aside, revealing a hidden door. "This leads to a panic room," he said. "It's reinforced and secure. Stay there until this is over." Amara hesitated. "What about you?" Vincent met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his steely eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son." The hidden door opened to a narrow staircase that led to a small, dimly lit room. The space was sparse, with a monitor displaying the house's security feed and a few emergency supplies. Amara guided Julian inside and locked the door behind them. "Miss Amara," Julian said softly, his voice trembling, "will Dad be okay?" Amara knelt in front of him, forcing a reassuring smile. "Your dad is strong, Julian. He'll do everything he can to keep us safe." Julian nodded, though his fear was evident. Amara turned her attention to the security monitor, watching as Marcus and his men moved through the West Wing. They were methodical, sweeping each room with precision. Alex was nowhere to be seen, and she couldn't shake the worry that something had gone wrong. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The tension was suffocating, each second bringing Marcus closer to their location. Then, on the monitor, Amara saw movement. Marcus entered the study, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the room. His 2 henchmen flanked him, their weapons drawn. Vincent stood in the center of the room, his gun raised but his expression calm. He didn't flinch as Marcus approached. "Vincent Blackwell," Marcus said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Still playing the noble protector, I see." "Marcus," Vincent replied evenly, "you should have stayed gone." "And missed the chance to finish what I started?" Marcus sneered. "You always were too sentimental for your own good." Amara's stomach churned as she listened to their exchange. It was clear they had history, one that had turned deadly. She glanced at Julian, who sat huddled in the corner, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. "Why are you here?" Vincent demanded. "You got what you wanted when Evelyn died. Or is ruining lives just a hobby for you?" Marcus chuckled darkly. "Oh, Vincent, Evelyn was only the beginning. You took everything from me, my position, my power. It's only fair I take everything from you." The conversation turned into a standoff, both men circling each other like predators. Marcus gestured for one of his men to search the room, likely looking for Julian. Amara's heart raced as the henchman approached the hidden door, his hand grazing the edge of the bookshelf. Before he could investigate further, a sudden commotion erupted outside. The sound of gunfire echoed through the halls, followed by Marshall's voice shouting commands. Amara watched on the monitor as Alex emerged from the shadows, taking out one of Marcus's men with swift, calculated precision. "Stay here," Amara whispered to Julian, her voice barely audible. She couldn't just sit and watch. Not when Alex was risking his life, and Vincent was outnumbered. Amara unlocked the hidden door and slipped into the hallway. She moved silently, the sounds of the fight guiding her steps. Her heart pounded as she reached the study and peered inside. Marcus stood over Vincent, his gun trained on him. Blood trickled from a gash on Vincent's temple, but his expression remained defiant. "You always did think you were untouchable," Marcus said, his tone venomous. "But even you have limits." "Funny," Vincent said through gritted teeth. "I was about to say the same thing." Before Marcus could react, Alex appeared behind him, his gun aimed steadily at Marcus's head. "Drop it," Alex commanded. Marcus froze, his lips curling into a smirk. "Ah, the prodigal son returns. I wondered when you'd show your face." "Drop the gun." "Marcus," Alex repeated. "Or I will." For a moment, it seemed Marcus might comply. But then, with lightning speed, he pivoted, firing a shot at Alex. The bullet grazed Alex's arm, but he didn't falter. He fired back, hitting Marcus in the shoulder and sending him sprawling to the ground. Amara rushed into the room as the dust settled. Marcus lay motionless, his henchmen either subdued or fled. Vincent was on his feet, his gun still trained on Marcus, who groaned in pain but remained conscious. "You should have stayed gone," Vincent said coldly. Amara stepped between them, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This ends here. No more blood." Vincent's gaze softened as he lowered his weapon. "You're right. It ends here." Marshall arrived moments later, his team securing Marcus and his men. Amara turned to Alex, who was cradling his injured arm. "Are you okay?" "I'll live," Alex said, offering a faint smile. "Thanks to you." As the adrenaline faded, Amara felt the weight of everything settle over her. Marcus was finally in custody, but the scars he had left behind were deep. She looked at Vincent, who was checking on Julian in the panic room. For the first time, she saw not a cold, distant billionaire, but a man who had fought to protect his family against impossible odds. "Thank you," Vincent said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "For everything." Amara nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. The battle was over, but the journey to healing had only just begun. The storm outside raged on as Marcus and his men were dragged away by Marshall's team. The heavy atmosphere in the mansion lingered, the echoes of gunfire and chaos still fresh. Amara stood in the study, watching Vincent cradle Julian, who clung to his father as though letting go might shatter their fragile world. "It's over," Alex said, his voice raspy as he leaned against the doorframe, clutching his injured arm. His face was pale, beads of sweat dotting his forehead, but his eyes were resolute. "Marcus won't hurt anyone again." Amara turned to him, her emotions a tumultuous mix of relief, anger, and confusion. "No thanks to you," she said, her voice sharp. If you had just told me the truth years ago. I know. Alex interrupted, his tone weary but firm. But what's done is done. The question now is how we move forward. Julian stirred in Vincent's arms, his soft voice breaking the tense silence. Daddy, who was that man? Why did he want to hurt us? Vincent hesitated, his grip tightening on Julian. He's someone from the past, he said carefully. Someone who made bad choices. Julian looked up at his father, his green eyes wide with innocence and understanding beyond his years. Is it because of Mommy? Amara's breath hitched at the boy's words. Julian had pieced together more than they had given him credit for. Vincent's face was a mask of controlled emotion as he answered, Yes, Julian, but he can't hurt us anymore. The mention of Evelyn's name hung in the air like a ghost, a reminder of the woman whose death had set everything into motion. Amara felt a pang of guilt as she thought of the journal she had found in the locked room. Evelyn's fears, her warnings, they had all been ignored, and now the family she left behind was left to pick up the pieces. You should rest, Amara said gently, addressing both Vincent and Alex. It's been a long night. Vincent nodded, though his eyes lingered on her, a silent gratitude in his gaze. Take Julian to his room, he said. I'll check on you both later. Amara guided Julian out of the study, her hands steady on his shoulder as they walked through the quiet halls. The boy was exhausted, his steps slow and heavy, but he didn't complain. When they reached his room, he climbed into bed without a word, his small body curling under the covers. Miss Amara, he murmured, his voice muffled by the pillow. Thank you for keeping me safe. Amara's heart clenched. Always, Julian, she said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Always. Back in the study, Alex sank into a chair, his injured arm bandaged by one of Marshall's men. Vincent stood by the window, his silhouette illuminated by the faint glow of the security lights outside. You should have told me, Vincent said without turning around. About Evelyn. About what you knew. Alex sighed, leaning his head back against the chair. I tried. She didn't want to involve you. She thought she could handle Marcus on her own. Vincent's fists clenched at his sides. And look where that got her. Don't act like you're the only one who lost her, Alex snapped, his voice laced with pain. I cared about her too. She was the only one who believed me when I said Marcus was dangerous. Then why didn't you stop him? Vincent shot back, finally turning to face Alex. Why did you let him destroy everything? Alex met his gaze, his expression hard. Because I didn't have the power you did. You were the one who could have stopped him. But you were too busy building your empire to see the cracks forming beneath you. The accusation hung in the air, cutting deep. Vincent looked away, his jaw tight. I failed her, he said quietly. And I failed Julian. Alex softened at the admission, though his voice remained steady. You still have a chance to make it right. For Julian. For yourself. The weight of Alex's words lingered long after he left the room. Vincent remained by the window, staring out at the storm as if searching for answers in the darkness. He thought of Evelyn, her laughter, her warmth, and the secrets she had carried alone. And then he thought of Amara, the woman who had stepped into their lives and brought light into the shadows. Meanwhile, Amara paced the length of her room, her thoughts a whirlwind. She couldn't shake the image of Alex's face when he had walked into the safe room, the pain and guilt etched into his features. For years, she had believed him dead, a victim of Marcus's schemes. Now, he was alive, and the truth was far more complicated than she had imagined. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Vincent standing there, his expression unreadable. Can we talk? He asked. Amara nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding even in the dim light. Thank you, he said, his voice low, for everything you did tonight. I didn't do it for you, Amara said, crossing her arms. I did it for Julian. I know, Vincent said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, but that doesn't make me any less grateful. Amara hesitated, her defenses wavering. You don't have to thank me, Vincent. Protecting Julian is my job. It's more than a job to you, Vincent said, his gaze softening. I see the way you care for him, the way you protect him. You're the reason he's still smiling, despite everything he's been through. Amara's heart ached at his words, but she forced herself to stay focused. Julian deserves to be happy. He deserves to feel safe. Vincent nodded, his expression thoughtful. You've given him that. And you've given me hope? Hope for what? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For a future, Vincent said, his eyes locking onto hers. For something more than just surviving. The air between them was charged, the unspoken connection growing stronger with each passing moment. Amara's pulse quickened, but before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Marshall stood in the doorway, his face grim. Sir, there's something you need to see. Amara and Vincent followed him to the security room, where the footage from the previous hours was being reviewed. Marshall pointed to a frame showing Marcus in the West Wing, a piece of paper in his hand. He held it up to the camera, as if taunting them. The image was grainy, but the words on the paper were clear. The truth isn't buried, it's in the house. Amara's stomach dropped. What does that mean? She asked. Vincent's expression darkened. It means Marcus left us a parting gift. Marshall rewound the footage, stopping at a frame showing Marcus entering the study earlier in the night. He placed a small device under the desk before leaving. A recording device, Marshall said grimly. We need to find out what's on it. The study was eerily silent as Vincent retrieved the device and plugged it into a laptop. The recording crackled to life, Marcus's voice filling the room. You think this is over, Vincent? He sneered. The secrets in this house will destroy you. Evelyn tried to tell you, and you ignored her. Let's see if you ignore her now. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Amara exchanged a glance with Vincent, her chest tightening. What secrets? She asked. Vincent's jaw tightened. I don't know, but we're going to find out. The next morning dawned with an eerie stillness that blanketed the mansion. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside calm, but inside, the tension remained thick and oppressive. The recording Marcus had left behind played over and over in Vincent's mind. He had failed Evelyn once. He wouldn't fail Julian now. Amara sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Alex sat across from her, his arm in a sling and his face pale from the night's events. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the soft clatter of Lily helping Julian with breakfast nearby. Do you think Marcus meant it? Amara finally asked, her voice low. That there are still secrets hidden in this house? Alex hesitated, his jaw tightening. If Marcus said it, he meant it. He never played games unless he had an endgame in mind. Vincent entered the room, his presence commanding as always. His suit was pristine despite the events of the night before, and his expression was set in grim determination. We're going to search the house, he announced. Every room, every corner. If there's something Marcus left behind, I want it found. I'll help, Amara said immediately, standing. Vincent met her gaze, a flicker of something softer crossing his face. Thank you. Alex pushed himself to his feet, wincing. Count me in. No, Vincent said firmly. You need to rest. You've done enough. Alex bristled but didn't argue. Amara sensed his frustration but understood Vincent's reasoning. They couldn't afford any more casualties. The search began in the West Wing, where Marcus had spent the most time during his intrusion. Amara and Vincent moved methodically through each room, uncovering nothing but dust and old memories. The house, despite its grandeur, felt suffocating with the weight of its secrets. In Evelyn's locked room, Amara hesitated before stepping inside. The piano sat untouched, its keys covered in a thin layer of dust. Sheet music was scattered across the top, and the faint scent of lavender still lingered. What are we looking for? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Anything out of place? Vincent said, his tone clipped. He moved to the desk and began rifling through the drawers. Marcus wouldn't have mentioned this unless he was certain we'd find it. Amara's eyes landed on the framed photograph of Evelyn and Julian. Her fingers brushed the edge of the frame as a memory surfaced. Evelyn's journal, the fear she had written about, the warnings Vincent had ignored. Do you think Evelyn knew? she asked, turning to Vincent. About whatever this is? Vincent paused, his hands stilling over a stack of papers. If she did, she didn't tell me. The search turned up nothing in Evelyn's room, and they moved to the study, where the tension only grew. Vincent's desk, normally a sanctuary of order and precision, was now a mess of scattered files and overturned drawers. Amara sifted through a stack of papers, her movements deliberate. Her frustration mounted as every document proved irrelevant. "There's nothing here," she said, exasperated. "There has to be," Vincent replied, his voice tight. He slammed a drawer shut, his patience wearing thin. Amara hesitated, her eyes scanning the room. The recording played in her mind again. "Evelyn tried to tell you, and you ignored her. Let's see if you ignore her now." "What if it's not in the open?" she said suddenly. "What if it's something hidden?" Vincent's gaze snapped to her, his mind racing. He crossed the room to a cabinet on the far wall and began pulling books off the shelves. One by one, he tossed them aside until his hand stilled on a worn leather-bound volume. "This isn't mine," he said, holding it up. Amara took it, her fingers brushing over the faded title, The Cost of Loyalty. She opened it carefully, her breath hitching as a folded piece of paper fell out. The note was in Evelyn's handwriting, her elegant script unmistakable. "Vincent, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you in time. Marcus is more dangerous than we realized. He's been using your company to fund illegal operations, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. Protect Julian. Protect yourself. And don't trust anyone, not even those closest to you." Amara read the note aloud, her voice trembling as the words sank in. Vincent's expression hardened. His hands clenched at his sides. "She knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She tried to warn me. And Marcus killed her for it," Amara said, "to keep her quiet." Vincent's jaw tightened. This ends now. As they pieced together the clues, a chilling realization emerged. Marcus's operations hadn't just been about greed. He had been using Blackwell Industries as a front for human trafficking, smuggling vulnerable people under the guise of legitimate business deals. Evelyn had uncovered the truth, and her refusal to stay silent had cost her life. Vincent's fury was palpable. He paced the room like a caged lion, his mind racing with plans for retribution. Amara watched him carefully, her own anger simmering beneath the surface. "You can't take this on alone," she said. "I don't have a choice," Vincent replied. "This is my mess to clean up." "No," Amara said firmly. "This is about more than just you. Marcus hurt all of us. Evelyn, Alex, my family. We fight this together." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden blare of an alarm. Vincent's eyes widened, and he bolted for the door, Amara close behind. They followed the sound to the security room, where Marshall was staring at the monitors with a grim expression. "What happened?" Vincent demanded. "Marcus's men," Marshall said. "They've breached the perimeter again. They're here to finish what he started." Amara's stomach dropped. "How many?" "2, maybe 3, Marshall replied. "But they're heavily armed." Vincent turned to Amara. "Take Julian and Lily to the panic room. Now." "No," Amara said, her voice sharp. "I'm staying with you." "Amara." "You need me," she interrupted. "You can't protect this house on your own." Vincent hesitated, his gaze searching hers. Finally, he nodded. "Stay close." The next moments were a blur of movement and adrenaline. Vincent armed himself, and Amara followed his lead, taking a small handgun from Marshall. The mansion's halls became a battlefield as they prepared to face Marcus's final gambit. The intruders were methodical, their movements calculated as they worked their way toward the study. Vincent and Amara held their ground, their determination unwavering. When the first intruder appeared, Vincent fired without hesitation, his shot precise. Amara's pulse raced as she took cover, her heart pounding in her ears. "Stay with me," Vincent said, his voice steady. "We'll get through this." The confrontation escalated quickly, the sounds of gunfire and shouts echoing through the mansion. Amara's fear was matched only by her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for Julian, for Evelyn, and for the truth. When the final intruder fell, the house fell silent once more. Amara lowered her weapon, her hands trembling as the adrenaline faded. "It's over," Vincent said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Amara looked at him, her chest tight. "No," she said softly. "It's just beginning." The mansion was eerily quiet in the aftermath of the confrontation. The once majestic halls bore the scars of violence, shattered vases, bullet holes in the walls, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. Amara stood in the foyer, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline. Vincent was beside her, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Are they all gone?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent nodded. Marshall confirmed it. "The remaining men have been subdued. Marcus's operation is done." Amara exhaled, her shoulders sagging as the weight of the night's events bore down on her. It was over, or at least the immediate threat was. But the emotional and physical wounds left in Marcus's wake would take much longer to heal. They found Julian and Lily in the panic room, where Marshall had kept them safe during the final battle. Julian rushed to Vincent, throwing his arms around his father with a sob of relief. "Daddy, are you okay?" Julian asked, his voice muffled against Vincent's chest. "I'm fine," Vincent said, holding Julian tightly. "It's over now. You're safe." Amara knelt beside Lily, who was pale but steady. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded, her eyes wide with concern. "What about you? Did they hurt you?" "No, I'm fine," Amara said, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "We're all fine." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. The emotional toll of the night would linger, haunting them in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Later that morning, the family gathered in the living room, their faces drawn with fatigue. Alex joined them, his arm in a sling and his expression grim. He sat beside Amara, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the secrets they had unearthed. "Marcus is finished," Vincent said, addressing the group, "but his actions have left a stain on this family that won't be easy to erase." "We'll face it together," Amara said firmly. Her gaze swept over Julian, Lily, and even Alex. "No more secrets. No more lies. We fight as a family." Vincent's eyes softened as he looked at her. "A family," he repeated, as though the word itself was foreign yet comforting. The days that followed were a blur of repairs and debriefings. Law enforcement swarmed the mansion, questioning everyone and documenting the evidence of Marcus's crimes. Vincent worked tirelessly with his legal team to ensure that Blackwell Industries would emerge unscathed from the scandal, while Amara focused on helping Julian and Lily regain a sense of normalcy. But despite their efforts, the mansion's atmosphere remained heavy. Evelyn's presence was everywhere, in the photographs, the journals, and the piano that now sat silent. Her memory was a constant reminder of the sacrifices made to protect the family. One evening, Amara found herself in Evelyn's room once more. She ran her fingers over the keys of the piano, their smooth surface cool beneath her touch. The melody she had heard playing from this room during her first days in the mansion still echoed in her mind. "You play?" Vincent's voice startled her, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway. "Not really," she admitted, brushing her hands against her skirt. "I just felt drawn here." Vincent entered the room, his gaze sweeping over the piano and the scattered sheet music. Evelyn used to play every night. It was her way of unwinding after a long day. "She must have been remarkable," Amara said softly. "She was," Vincent said, his voice tinged with regret. "And I failed her." Amara stood, crossing the room to place a hand on his arm. "You didn't fail her, Vincent. You trusted the wrong people. But you've done everything you can to protect Julian. Evelyn would be proud of you." Vincent met her gaze, his eyes searching hers. "You've done more for this family than I ever could have asked for. You've given Julian hope again. And you've given me something I thought I lost a long time ago." "What's that?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Faith," he said simply. "In the future. In the possibility of happiness." Amara's breath hitched as Vincent reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. The distance between them seemed to disappear, and for a moment, The weight of the past was replaced by the promise of something new. The next day, Vincent gathered the family in the garden for an impromptu meeting. The sun shone brightly, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold tension that had gripped the mansion for so long. "I've made a decision," Vincent announced. "It's time we let go of the past and move forward. This house has been a sanctuary, but it's also been a prison. It's time we build a new home, a fresh start." Julian looked up at his father, his eyes wide. "A new house?" Vincent nodded. "Somewhere smaller, cozier. A place where we can be a real family." Amara felt a pang of emotion at his words. The mansion, for all its grandeur, had indeed been a place of isolation and pain. A fresh start was exactly what they all needed. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations for the move. As the family packed their belongings, they uncovered mementos of the past, photos, letters, and keepsakes that told the story of their journey. Amara found herself drawn to a particular photograph of Evelyn holding Julian as a baby, her smile radiant. "She'd want you to have that," Alex said, appearing behind her. Amara turned to him, her eyes misty. "You think so?" "I know so," Alex said. "You've done more for this family than anyone else could have. Evelyn would have loved you." Amara smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Alex, for everything." On the day of the move, the family gathered in the foyer one last time. The house was empty now, its once lively halls quiet and still. Vincent stood at the center, Julian by his side, while Amara and Lily flanked them. "This house has seen its share of joy and sorrow," Vincent said, his voice steady. "But it's time to leave it behind and build something new. Together." Amara reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. She looked at Julian, whose face was alight with hope, and Lily, who had grown stronger through the trials they had faced. "Together," she echoed. As they drove away from the mansion, the weight of the past began to lift. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but filled with promise. Amara glanced at Vincent, whose hand rested on hers, and then at Julian and Lily, who sat in the back seat, their laughter filling the car. For the first time in years, Amara felt a sense of peace. The shadows of the past had been confronted, and though the scars would remain, they no longer defined them. They were a family now, imperfect but united. And as they left the mansion behind, they carried with them not just the lessons of the past but the hope of a brighter future.